Police officers, what is your best "I think we have the wrong person" story? I've got two from 25 years ago when I was a cop, one on each side of the badge and one from the other. First, I got assigned a warrant service to pick up a wanted felon. Mr. Robertson was a 6-foot tall, 250-pound, long, red hair, bushy red beard, and lived at, let's say, 123 Elm Street. Pretty distinctive dude. So, I roll up to 123 Elm Street, and sure enough, there, mowing his lawn in front of the yard, is the man himself, 6 feet, 250, red hair, red beard. I made contact with him. "Hey, Mr. Robertson, you got warrants and it's time to go to jail." Hook him up, take him to jail, and in central booking, I get his property off of him, and while filling out the inventory, happen to notice this guy is Mr. Robinson, not Robertson. Sure enough, the wanted guy was my guy's landlord and his twin brother from another mother doppelganger. When I said Robertson, Robinson didn't even twig to the fact I hadn't said his name. He just heard the similar sounding name as his own. We had to walk the whole thing back and reactivate the warrant, then kicked him loose with a handshake and an apology. The one from the other side, I had just gotten off duty at 2 a.m. and was driving home still in uniform. There wasn't any other traffic on the road, so I wasn't really surprised when a police car turned in behind me and started following me. I figured he was trolling and I was the only thing moving on the road, so he was just going to follow me a little to observe my driving, and he'd realize pretty quickly I was sober and peel off. Instead, another patrol car joined him, and another, and another. Then all four lit me up and spread out behind me, blocking the road in a full felony stop. Well, this just got interesting. They went through the whole procedure, and I carefully followed their instructions. When they finally got me out and saw my uniform, they just stopped for a few seconds while I was trying to figure out just what the hell was going on. Then 3 of the officers got in their cars, turned off their lights, and took off while the original officer told me I could put my hands down and explain what was going on. My car was a spot-on match for the suspect vehicle in an armed robbery that had just occurred right up the road. I'd driven right by the scene before the cops even got there a few minutes before the officer in the next district spotted me and thought I was the suspect. That was an interesting night. The chances, that description is weird already, but 2 in the same house with the red hair and the red beard? Come on. Story 2. I'm not a cop, but my mom had a story about this happening to her. Basically, it revolves around the show America's Most Wanted. A woman who looked almost exactly like my mom was featured on the show. She had the same hair, same face, and the kicker, same name. They even showed my mom's actual information, which I won't list here, as being the criminals. The story ended like every story on that show does. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of this dangerous criminal, please call this number. Now on to my mom's perspective. She was just sitting at home on a Saturday night alone, and she lived alone. She was reading a Stephen King book when she heard some commotion coming from the hallway. She ignores it, lots of yelling. She had not seen the show, which painted her as a criminal. Then suddenly, bam, her door is knocked down in an instant. About 10 cops flood into her 1-bedroom apartment and she's arrested. She explained they had the wrong person. They claimed everything matched. Social security matched, DNA matched, name matched, photo resemblance matched. It turns out the woman was basically stealing my mom's identity and intentionally making herself look like my mom. The end result is that when they created a profile for the criminal, they used my mom's information to start with. So when they arrested my mom, of course the information matched. It was her information originally. They kept her in jail for 2 weeks. It wasn't until they took fingerprints from the scene of a crime they said she committed, and the prints didn't match, that they realized she wasn't the criminal. It's scary to think if they had used her profile prints rather than crime scene prints as the set to compare to, that she would have still been in jail today. It was basically a life sentence. Story 3. Obligatory, not a cop. A few years ago, my husband and I were having a lazy Sunday morning, making pancakes, blasting music, having a good time. There's a really loud banging on the door, and I rush over to answer it, thinking someone must have knocked a couple times before we heard it, and opened it up to 4 police officers who pushed into our kitchen. 2 of them grab my husband and start telling him that he's being placed under arrest for an accident that took place in a city almost 2 hours away. Freaking out, my husband explains to the police that he was at work all night and just got home about an hour before that. It must have been really convincing because 2 officers sat at our kitchen table with us while the other 2 went outside to call my husband's workplace to confirm his story. Turns out a car that we had sold about a year before was involved in an accident, but the driver was nowhere to be found. There was a clear video of our old car smashing into parked cars. When the police found the abandoned car and ran the VIN, it led them to our house. In Ontario, when you sell a vehicle, you're supposed to bring a slip into the Service Ontario Centre to prove that the ownership has transferred, but it's not really enforced and there's no penalties for not doing it because the person purchasing the vehicle needs to do the same to get plates, stickers, insurance, etc. Obviously, and stupidly, we didn't do this. Cops came back in, apologized for the mistake, gave us a half-hearted lecture about properly switching ownerships, and left. The guy that was actually driving the car was caught the next day. An officer called my husband to tell him and made a joke about us having to pay any impound fees. Story 4. Used to live in ML in a somewhat sketchy adjacent neighborhood, alone. I was asleep in my bed one Thursday morning around 3 a.m. when I heard banging on the door. Thinking it's one of the local dealers, I pay it no mind, and then I hear a bang and the damn front door is off its hinges. I grab the baseball bat I keep by my bed for such occurrences and go out of my bedroom, ready to swing. Next thing I know, I'm on the ground. I said something like, "What the hell, man? Where's the warrant?" Dude said, "Shut up." Decided to comply because anytime a cop starts yelling, your chances of being fired start to rise. Anywho, cops are tearing my house to the ground, flipped my mattress, tore it open, pulled everything out of my drawers, trashed my kitchen, etc., etc. They didn't find what they were looking for. Finally, somebody shines a light at my very feminine face and says, "Oh, crap." Cop on my back gets off of me. Finally, I again repeat my previous question about what is going on, less politely. I ask again to see a warrant. They produce it, and I go to the bedroom to get my glasses. Warrant is for an address, one number off of mine, an address that doesn't exist. These guys executed a warrant on a property that didn't exist and used mine because it was the closest thing to it. This is apparently pretty illegal. We settled out of court and I got the hell out of Missouri and I'm never coming back. Screw you, St. Louis cops. When your home becomes a crime scene for a crime you didn't commit, there you go. Story 5. Dispatcher here. I got 2 stories. First, I get a call from another county not so close to us asking about a stolen license plate or a car. I can't remember which. I ran what they had and it came back stolen and reported it with our agency. The officer says they're out with the car and the registered owner and they swear they've never reported anything stolen and have never been to our county. Long story short, we entered it with a typo because the dispatcher wrote out the entry log first, handwritten, and then went to the NCIC terminal and entered it based on their log entry. They couldn't read their own handwriting and replaced a U and a V in the tag. What's worse is that we second and third party check all entries. So that's another experienced dispatcher and the shift supervisor checking off on this entry. Of course, no one got into trouble for this. Second, the story goes that we received a warrant confirmation request from another agency and we confirmed the warrant based on the request. Turns out the other agency stopped out with a kid and ran them by name. Their name was similar to someone with a warrant in our county. When their dispatchers sent the confirmation request, they used the info from our warrant entry to ask if we had a warrant on that person. Well, of course we do. What kind of stupid question is that? For those wondering, you are supposed to send the request using the info your officer gives you. If they did that, we probably would have spotted the error. So this kid that's never been to our county and has never been in trouble his entire life was picked up on a warrant on Friday that wasn't his and held in that jail until Monday because it was a no-bond warrant and had to wait to see a judge. Kid's father finds out who confirmed the warrant on our side and starts pestering her on Facebook. That was fun. Story 6. A Missouri man spent nearly 17 years behind bars for a robbery until his doppelganger was discovered, and the other guy looked so much like him that authorities decided to toss out his conviction. Jones, 41, had been serving a 19-year jail sentence for a 1999 robbery when he heard other inmates buzzing that another person looked just like him and even shared his first name, Starr said. It's unclear what the other man was locked up for, and Jones never saw his doppelganger, but he told 2 legal interns assigned to his case about the rumors, according to Alice Craig, one of Jones's lawyers. The interns brought the message back to their superiors at the Midwest Innocence Project and the Paul E. Wilson Defender Project, who dug further into the case. It turned out that not only did the other man bear an uncanny resemblance to Jones, he also lived closer to the site of the crime. Jones's doppelganger, Ricky Amos, used to live with his mother in Kansas City, Kansas, near the address of the incident, Craig said. Jones lived across the state line in Kansas City, MO. When I saw that picture, it made sense to me, said Jones, who was denied committing the robbery, to the Star. Either you're going to think we're the same person, or you're going to be like, man, these guys, they look so much alike. His lawyers showed the two men's photos to the victim, two witnesses, and the prosecutor in Jones's case, and all four admitted they could not tell the pair apart, according to the Star. Story 7. Not an officer, but I live in a neighborhood in Indy that is going through a major revitalization right now, so it's very much in a transitional phase. We rent a house from a good friend of ours. He bought the house from some garbage people who had lived there a long time. In general, the house was disgusting, unlivable really, just the worst. Well, the people who lived here still try to use our address even after 5 years. And about a year and a half ago, one of the dudes used our address to renew his driver's license at the DMV. He even had the audacity to leave a note for us to call him when the license came. Fast forward a few months, around Christmas time, we're all sitting around watching TV when we get a knock on the door. My husband answers it, and it's a SWAT team. They see my husband, who does not look like a criminal, and inside are our two little boys, my parents, and me nursing our baby, plus the Christmas tree, and all the lovely trappings of our home. They immediately put their weapons down, and my husband and I had a lovely chat with them. Yeah, they had our house surrounded, looking for this dude who was wanted on some kind of violent felony. We were mad at this dude who I refer to as Big Nasty. Well, that's one way to get a surprise visit from Santa. Knock, knock. Story 8. I live in a small town in rural England, and we used to get some trainees and new police officers from the Met there for their training. Me and some of my friends were teenagers. We were walking to the supermarket because what else is there to do in a small town pre-internet? Suddenly, from out of nowhere, this police car comes screaming out of nowhere, sirens going, and screeches to a halt in front of us. A young guy, who must have only been about 5 years or so older than us, jumps out and starts giving us the whole hairdryer treatment. He lines us up and starts taking our statements of what we had been up to in the last hour, gloating at us. You lads are in trouble now, criminal damage, trespass, theft, you really have screwed up. With him was a local Bobby, and he came up to each of us in turn after the younger guy had grilled us and said very jovially, "Now don't worry, lads, I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. We have some reports of a break-in. You don't match the preliminary description, and I'm sure we'll get this cleaned up when we get the more detailed description come through." So the more detailed description comes through the radio, and the young guy is wearing the biggest grin you've ever seen. The description didn't even remotely match, and honestly, the young guy looked so disappointed we all ended up feeling sorry for him. So yeah, that was probably quite embarrassing for him. Story 9. Not a cop, but the wrong person in question. There's another man, 2 years younger than me, who shares my first and last name, exact same spelling. The only difference is the middle name. Police were investigating a county trustee who was giving people housing assistance checks they didn't qualify for. They would cash the assistance and give the trustee a percentage back. One of the civilians being investigated was the other guy. A plainclothes cop in an unmarked car shows up with the female holding a clipboard, identifies himself as a state trooper, and within 5 minutes is asking me for copies of my bank records. He's threatening to subpoena me if I don't comply. And this isn't the first time I've been mistaken for him. I used to get his mail all the time. And I even asked if they were looking for me or the other guy, pointing out our different middle names. I got really suspicious really fast, a high-pressure situation, demanding access to my financial records, threats of subpoenas, and further legal action. So I started to doubt this was an actual police officer and was in fact just a scammer. The badge he showed me was just a plastic square like my driver's license, further muddying the issue. I told him I wanted to speak with the police and called dispatch. 2 uniformed officers showed up 15 minutes later and confirmed the guy was an officer. The woman with him was some kind of auditor and records keeper. After a further 15 minutes of questions, a woman pulled the guy away and pointed out something on her phone. Yep, they wanted the other guy. Story 10. 2 of my colleagues attended custody to meet a defendant answering bail. When they arrived at the custody desk, there were a couple of people hanging around, waiting for their solicitors. They told the custody sergeant they were there for, insert name, and he pointed one of the guys out. They went up and introduced themselves and said they would be questioning him at another station, so all 3 got in the car and headed off. Whilst driving, they told the defendant what would be happening. On arrival, he would be arrested, questioned, and either bailed or remanded. The guy was like, "You gotta be joking. I was shoplifting." He was relatively calm, half laughing and shaking his head. A short time later, one of the officers got a call from the custody sergeant. Their actual bail appointment had arrived. There were 2 defendants with the same name answering bail that day. They apologized to the shoplifter, turned the car around, and headed back to bring the right person in for questioning. Keystone Cops to the max. Story 11. Since everyone else isn't a cop, I was 16 and worked at a golf course mowing lawns and such. We got a call at home from the cops that said I'm a suspect in an accident because my plate numbers were on the car that drove away without stopping. The cop said the car was maroon colored, my car was gray. We told them and figured that was that. The next day at work, there was a minor accident. A coworker pulled a metal rake too hard and the rack holding it came down onto my forehead. My boss took me to the ER to get my head superglued and to be safe, took me home too. Thus, my car stayed at the golf course. That evening, a cop comes by and finds me with a head wound and my car is missing. I look quite guilty. By sheer luck, the cop calls someone after talking to my parents and discovers they got the guy and the plate numbers were close. I probably would have been arrested. Story 12. Once again, not a police officer, but I was on the receiving end. I'd been at a small bar listening to some live music with a friend. We leave a couple of hours later, and less than a mile from the bar, I get pulled over. No big deal. I pull into a circular driveway, and then I get scared. No fewer than 4 police cars surrounded us, 2 behind and 2 in front. They come to both sides and leave a number of officers at our windows while they run our licenses. You see, earlier, in between sets, a lady got on stage and warned any woman there not to walk home or accept rides from strangers. Apparently, there had been a number of crimes in the area. My friend and I ignored it. We were not alone and we were not women. Finally, the cops give us our identification back and tell us we matched the descriptions. Didn't say how they determined it wasn't us, but apologized and sent us on our way. It wasn't until the next day we realized just how bad that could have been. Story 13. I was a guy, got pulled over a block from a local Mcdonald's. Officer explains he got a report that the manager at McDonald's reported that a guy about my description tried to grab the cash drawer from a register when she opened it to make change for him. When she resisted, he fled in a yellow Ford LTD. I happened to be driving a Ford LTD. I told him I wasn't the guy, asking if the name of the manager who reported it was Tina. Yep. Well, then she would have told you my name when reporting the attempted robbery if I was a culprit. I'd been working there as a manager for about 2 years, and she would definitely have recognized me. He agreed that I was unlikely to be the culprit. I immediately drove over to find out what happened from Tina. Evidently, she went aggro when the guy tried to grab the door and just grabbed both his hands. Evidently, it was all the guy could do to tear himself away and flee. Story 14. Not a police officer, but I'm in a class called Wildlife Law Enforcement, which is taught by a game warden. They have police powers and can be called in if backup is needed. My teacher is a great dude and he loves stories. Anyways, my local police force has a way of capturing people with outstanding warrants that may or may not be common. What they do is send a letter to the perp saying they won a prize from the city. Apparently, how they deliver this makes it seem very legit. To receive your prize, you have to go to the community center at a certain date and time, then the police get you after you sign in for your prize. So in my city, they set this up and sent a letter to a particular man with a very recognizable name. The day of the prize claiming, this very large old man comes in and is soon fighting against 3 officers in this community center claiming, and he fought pretty hard thinking he was being jumped, but of course got cuffed and stuffed in the back of a squad car. The issue? They didn't check the important details of age. They captured Senior when Junior was the one with the warrant. They assumed because of this man's very recognizable name that there could be only one. Story 15. I remember when my son was 3 weeks old, it's 3 a.m. and I'm lying down on the couch, baby is in his rocker. Suddenly there's a loud knocking on my door followed by, "Police." I thought for sure it was my friends coming back from the bar and they needed a place to crash and they have done that when the police knocked on me before. So I'm sitting there all mad thinking they don't know I just had a kid. Needless to say, I didn't answer the door, figured they could find somewhere else to crash. And next thing I know, my door is kicked down. I grab the baby and run towards the door and 4 or 5 police officers run in. They search my house with flashlights, scare the crap out of my sleeping husband. My 5-year-old didn't wake up though, LOL. Turns out they had the wrong address. They apologized and a week later they installed a new door for me, but holy hell, that was scary. But if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 16. Sort of fits. I used to work in an AWOL section in the Army where we would collect soldiers that were AWOL from various jails and process them. One time we got paperwork for a guy that was supposedly AWOL since the Korean War. Both me and the LA officers had no idea what to make of it. The guy was old. I don't remember exactly how old. And obviously, the paperwork we had from his enlistment was outdated and impossible to tell from the picture if it was him or not. I mean, it was 50 years prior. The person in custody was saying he was never in the army and that it was a mistaken identity. He was Korean, and his name, particularly his last name, was not all that unique. I think Kim, Lee, and Park account for something like 60% of South Korean last names. Socials weren't used as ID numbers back then, so we couldn't use that. We ended up just letting him go because A, we had no way to tell if he was even the right guy or not, and B, we weren't going to send a 70-year-old guy to get dishonorable discharged. Still no idea if it was the right guy. Story 17. Obligatory not a cop, but one day I was on my way home and I noticed a police helicopter flying overhead. I lived in a big city at the time, so I thought nothing of it until I was blocked in by two police officers. Someone in an SUV, very similar to mine, had been trying to lure children at a school nearby and was considered a dangerous offender due to previous convictions. They thought they had their guy, but all they had that day was a very pregnant and bewildered white girl in an SUV with her ice cream. The one officer came to my window and asked me if I knew anything about someone luring children in my Jeep that day, and I looked at him in bewilderment. I have a panic disorder, hopefully that explains my reaction, and I blurted out, "I have two under 5 and one right here. What the heck do I want someone else's for?" Luckily, they let me go after telling me what to keep an eye out for. I can laugh about it now. Story 18. Not a police officer, but the person they talked to. I just finished a cooking class and my husband was waiting for me. It was 9:30 at night and the parking for the class was in a back alley. Before we left, the officers turned on their lights and asked for identification and registration. They said in their system our plates were registered to a green vehicle. Ours was white. They let us go on our way since the registration was all correct but told us to talk to the DMV and get it cleared up. The next day, I went to the DMV and they said that the only car with those plates was our current vehicle. Best we can figure is that we purchased this car in September and in August our DMV had switched to a new computer system. So the old system was registered to our old vehicle. On the new system, they were registered to the new vehicle. And the police were still looking at the old system. This was in February, so 6 months after the switchover. I have to wonder how many other people they had incorrect vehicle information on. Story 19. Sorry to just be another person who wasn't the PO in the story. I was in high school and me and my 3 best friends were having a sleepover at one of their homes. We wanted to watch Netflix on TV but didn't have an HDMI cord. My friend's dad said he'd drive us to Walmart to get a cord, but her older sister said she would instead, kind of an important detail. Anyways, we make a turn out of my friend's neighborhood onto the main road and we hear sirens behind us. So my friend's sister pulled over. When the sirens did not pass us, we realized that we were being pulled over for some unknown reason. By the time we realized the PO was already at our window, he had a really powerful voice and he yelled at my friend's sister to roll the window down now. By this point, we were all shaking and freaking out. As soon as she rolls the window down, the PO shines his flashlight at all of us. He sees 5 terrified girls. Immediately, he backs off. He asks for friend's sister's license. She hands it to him, and I just remember how much she was shaking. PO asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Friend's sister says, "No, sir, I honestly have no idea why." PO says, "Well, it's because of the way you came out of that neighborhood." Friend's sister says, "Okay." PO asks, "Are these your sisters?" I think he's backpedaling at this point because we're all clearly not sisters. He continues, "Well, your car matched the description of another car, so yes, here is your license. Have a good night." After we started driving again, my friend's sister goes, "I'm so glad my dad didn't end up driving you." And I honestly think about what might have happened if he was the one who drove us a lot. Story 20. It was a few years ago, roughly near the end of 2015. Dad, an officer, and I were sitting in traffic on our way to get some lunch. He punched in the license plate in front of us and got a hit. The plates did not match the car, so he pulls them over and gets the story. The driver, it turns out, was a guy who apparently was out on a $10,000 bond, and it was either because of the license plate not being on the right car, he only put it on his good car because he thought it was okay to do since his old one broke, or something else which caused him to be arrested. Either way, he was polite and respectful, as was everyone else involved. The entire ride to the dolly bay was just off, though. When we got inside and began processing, his name came up twice, both times with different bonds. One of the 2 different bonds, one was significantly higher. I'm talking like 10 times higher. Now, this was odd for a number of reasons, according to pretty much everyone there. The most bizarre is that this person was in the system twice. Same name, same address, same image, and same prints. But nearly everything else was wrong. The crime was across the state and not on record. The version with the $100,000 bond had details such as tattoos that the guy my dad was processing didn't have. There were also details like scars and jewelry tones and such, which didn't match. As per protocol, they had to wait until someone from the state police could come and also verify the double entry. At that time, the person who was being processed was being held in the station until the state police could sort it out. I wasn't there for the rest of the story, but I did get some of the details when I went for another ride along, and I had to wait for the administrator. Turns out the guy my dad processed was the $100,000 bond guy, and somewhere down the line, a clerk in the court misfiled the two individuals. I'll admit that for the longest time, I expected to hear they had someone in the court system get paid to cover up for the $100,000 bond individual so they could escape. Then again, I was often bored on ride-alongs, stuck in an old Crown Vic most of the time, and bored. Still loved it, though. Story 21. Not a police officer, but I have a story of mistaken identity that happened to my brother. He rode Harleys for 20 years. He was into the Harley lifestyle, clothes, bike vacations to Sturgis and Bike Week, etc. But he was in no way a biker. He had a custom license plate on his bike that was very desirable for Harley owners all over North America. I don't want to say what it was, but the letters HD were part of it. One day, he gets a knock on his door. It was a detective that wanted to speak to him about something. My brother invited him in, and the detective started asking him a bunch of questions about his friends, who he spends time with, and where he was on a certain night a few weeks earlier. Tells him there was a crime and the suspect was riding a Harley Davidson with his license plate and had a similar physical description: big guy, leather jacket, black leather boots, and beard. They suspected it was gang-related. After talking to my brother, he told him that he didn't think they had the right guy. He had no criminal record and no affiliation with anyone in a gang. Plus, they were following him everywhere for a week. Turns out the guy they were looking for had the same type of Harley, same license plate, but from a different state or province, and looked like him. Needless to say, he changed his license plate the next day. Story 22. Not a Leo, but I've witnessed something like this. My roommate about 10 years ago had a pretty common name. With the exception, it was one letter different and pronounced differently. Fake name, but let's call him Wason, like the norm is Jason. Wason has a pretty common last name too, let's say Smith. So he was pulled over for having a tail light out. They looked at his ID and, according to the officers, ran his name and didn't check anything else. The elder officer stayed near his car while the younger one did the check. Comes back, asks him to get out of the car. Wason says, sure, but why? Big mistake. Weapons drawn, everyone out of the car, on the ground, they're searching the car. They pat him down and call for backup. After what seemed like forever, they come back and apologize. Apparently, there's another Wason Smith in the area on the run. He lets us go. We look up his name, and it's true. It was in the local news like a month before this happened. Wason Smith was wanted and was known to carry lots of weapons in the car, hence the car search. A 1 in a million name, and there's two that live within 30 miles of each other. Story 23. Not a police officer, but this is pretty relevant. Sorry, it's a long one. I was at my boyfriend's, we'll call him B, apartment in Louisiana, which is in kind of a rough neighborhood. We were watching a movie on the couch, and after taking my sleeping pills, fell asleep. At about 1:30 a.m., there's loud banging on the door, and B gets up to investigate. My pills knocked me out pretty hard, so I barely opened my eyes and saw B get yanked out the door, and about 9 officers flood the apartment. They start asking me tons of questions, and I'm barely coherent at this point. Ma'am, are you okay? Did you call the police? How long have you been asleep? What's your name? Etc. From outside the apartment, B tries telling them I fell asleep watching a movie, and they scold him for trying to answer for me. They're patting him down against the wall outside and are about to cuff him. They radio dispatch to call back the number that dialed 911 and are searching the apartment listening for it. I hold up my phone and tell them we didn't call the police, but they won't listen. Once I was finally able to get a word in, I asked him what this was all about. Turns out a woman in apartment 29 was being harmed by her boyfriend, so she called the police. I tell them this is A29, but there's also B29, C29, and D29. Suddenly, they all rush to me and are baffled by this new information. They start yelling, we've got to go, we've got to go, and suddenly they're all gone. There's dents in the doors, and we didn't get an apology, but I'm happy with the way they handled the situation. Story 24. Brother-in-law story. I'll call him Bill from here on out. So Bill gets a call to help question a car theft suspect. He's brief with, "We know he stole it because we found his things in the car and he admits driving it. He claims the car belongs to his friend and he was borrowing it, but the owner reported it stolen and activated the LoJack, which is how we found the car. The car is a gray Saturn. Who the heck gets LoJack for a Saturn? He stole the car by making a copy of the key, and the owner still has the original key still. We just don't know how he made a copy of the key. Looks legit, but maybe he knows someone at a dealership." So Bill goes in and the guy is crying and swearing up and down he was borrowing the car. Bill gives the guy's story a chance and calls a friend who owned the car. Friend says he owns the car and is happy to come and show proof. Bill asks friend to go see if his car is where he left it. It is in fact parked where friend left it last. At this point, Bill realized that however improbable what happened was the keys for Saturn cars have very limited uniqueness. In other words, one Saturn key will open many Saturns. So the suspect, now innocent, borrowed the car from his friend. He walked out to the street, and on that same street there was an identical gray Saturn which just so happened to accept the same key profile as his friend's car. His luck was even worse than that though, because this particular Saturn had LoJack installed. The suspect was borrowing the car to buy Christmas presents. He was given a ride home by the police. Story 25. Not a police officer, but a wrong person, like most of the rest of this thread. Some lovely individual decided for reasons which I'm sure were totally legitimate in that individual's mind, that it would be a great idea to mail a high-value package, depending on the info source, between $1,000 and $3,500 of substances from Germany to my apartment in China with my name and phone number on it. All evidence points to this lovely individual being a psychopath who was deliberately doing this with the intent of hurting me. Among other things, the package was done in such a way as to basically guarantee that it would get picked for customs inspection and clearance. When I answered the call to come downstairs and sign for my international mail, I had very good reason to believe that I was getting a birthday present from a German friend. First, obviously, this was something I found out about well after the fact, but I've been a volunteer translator for the police since around 2006. I used to organize a Chinese Law for Foreigners forum. I'm a volunteer liaison for my consulate, and that's just the good-looking on-paper type stuff. In short, I'm known to the police both professionally and socially, and during the planning stages of the raid on my apartment, I apparently had people arguing on my behalf that something didn't add up. Second, I clearly diffused all attempts to slyly trick me into letting them come into my apartment by running on 4 hours of sleep and cheerfully agreeing to let them come into my apartment. Given the severity of what I was suspected of, saying no would have delayed things by no more than 5 or 10 minutes. I continued to frustrate attempts at getting me to implicate myself by freely and fully answering questions. Sometimes I even volunteered information like the location and quantity, the contents of my stash, a rough count that everything in the stash was prescribed to me, and that it was an entirely legal collection. Third, while on camera, I was made to identify the name and address on the package, to state that it was my name and my address, and to open the package, which I did. It'll be another 6 or 8 hours before it's clearly determined that my friend in Germany had nothing to do with this package, that he, in fact, never even contacted me to ask my mailing address. Once I see what's in my birthday package, I freak out. People who have accidentally forgotten a pot holder when picking up something hot have dropped things less quickly than I dropped this. I'm supposed to point at the contents of the package for the video, and I literally can't even force my hand close enough to do so. My reaction is so far off from anything they've previously experienced that 3 of the police are just sort of standing there doing that slow, confused blink people do when stuff goes weird. In what probably would have been a chain of evidence breaking move had they not decided to let me go the next evening, one of the women officers walks through the handheld camera's line of sight to start patting me on the shoulders and telling me everything's going to be okay. Whoops, click send early. From here, things cascaded throughout the rest of my arrest, detention, and interrogation. I still periodically got the schmuck treatment from new or different police, but they kept modifying their behavior towards me through schmuck pretending to be confused, possibly actually confused, and eventually confused victim. Some of this was classic good cop, bad cop techniques, while other parts were, "Have you stopped hurting your wife?" type trick questions, where any simple answer is an admission of guilt, and I kept breaking all the scripts. For a few good hours during the middle of my interrogation, I kept demanding that I be allowed access to my laptop because I had a critically important project due at 6 p.m. for a very big name client with about 45 minutes of work left on it, and this whole being arrested thing was extremely inconvenient and annoying. And while I was perfectly fine with cooperating with them on this mystery package, I really needed to know when someone was going to get through to a person with the ability to grant me access to my laptop because I had actually important business to take care of, and as far as I was concerned, this was not important compared to a very big name client. I was so adamant about this that eventually someone sat and watched me work and recorded it, and then they emailed my project off for me. From little bits and pieces like the "why are you so cooperative? No one ever cooperates with us" question when they were back at my apartment the day after I was released, I can only imagine just how much I confused them. Story 26. Not a cop, but on the receiving end of it. Was driving home and decided to take the back roads because it was a nice day. Windows rolled down, I rounded the corners, I approached a tiny one-stop sign town, slowed down, and then accelerated as soon as I'm through it. About 15 seconds later, not even up to 50 miles per hour yet, I see a cop car come screaming up behind me, lights siren going, so I pull over and wait. Cop gets on the loudspeaker, demands that I turn off the truck. I already did. Toss the keys out the window, and I keep my hands out the window where he can see them. I'm confused as hell, but comply. Cop gets out of the car in the most Barney Fife moment I've ever seen. Gets out of the car, adjusts his hat, then checks his badge, pulls up his belt, then loosens his revolver in his holster as he approaches my truck. And all I can think about is some prank my dad is playing on me. He manages a fleet maintenance program and knows a lot of the cops in the surrounding areas. "Boy, do you know why I'm pulling you over today, do you, huh?" I shake my head no, not trusting myself to not laugh either at the ridiculousness or laugh in fear. I have had multiple complaints of a hooligan driving a right truck recklessly up down my roads with his music blasting, and everyone has said he was wearing a white shirt and a Florida State hat, just like you. Sir, it can't be me. I just picked this truck up from the body shop less than 30 minutes ago. A likely story. It's time-stamped by their printer. Also, I don't have a radio, not even speakers. Yes, you do. Don't lie to me, boy, or I'll charge you with resisting arrest. Can I open the door and step out, sir? He motions to do so, hand on his revolver like he's going to do some quick draw McGraw thing the entire time. I step out, open the door all the way, and show that the interior of the truck is gone. It's literally a seat bolted to the middle floor, the steering column with a temporary cluster of gauges, and the stick shift column. No carpet, no trim, no dash. The doors, you can see the windows rolled down inside the doors. What kind of truck were you looking for, sir? He's clearly confused at this point, pulls his notepad out of his shirt, flips a few pages and says, "Older model, F-150, extended cab, white mud tires." Well, this is an older model Chevy S10, stripped down for restoration with normal tires, but that might be the truck you're looking for right there. Ripping down the road towards us from behind, direction of the town, is a big Ford with Sweet Home Alabama blaring from it. Kid was wearing the same FSU hat as me and didn't even slow down, just swerved to the other side of the road and drove on the grassy shoulder. "So, what was your name again, sir? And does that mean I'm free to leave now?" And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.